We open our newscast with tragic news that one person was killed today in Kibbutz Goshlim in northern Israel from a direct hit of a Hezbollah rocket fired from Lebanon. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts are scrambling to avoid a mass Israeli retaliation against Hezbollah in response to the killing of 12 young people in Majd al-Shams in the Israeli Golan. Israeli leaders say that the response will come, and officials say the intention will not be to spark an all-out war. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Judging by the canceled flights at Beirut International Airport and the stern warnings being issued by Western governments to leave Lebanon immediately, the threat of a mass Israeli retaliation for the Hezbollah shelling on the Golan is real and imminent. The German government strongly advised its citizens to leave Lebanon immediately.
Wir haben seit Oktober 2023 eine Reisewarnung und eine Ausreiseaufforderung für Libanon. Und ich appelliere hier an alle Deutschen, die sich jetzt noch im Libanon aufhalten, die derzeit noch bestehenden Möglichkeiten zur Ausreise aus dem Libanon zu nutzen und dies jetzt dringlich auch zu tun.
U.S. Secretary of State Blinken called President Herzog to urge de-escalation. The British foreign minister sent the same message to the Lebanese foreign minister. Lebanon's foreign minister appealed for a diplomatic solution.
We think that there will be a little bit of escalation, but not that big, because the Israelis themselves are going to be hit. And if they go against Lebanon, it's going to be a big war. And they know that. And I don't think they want to do it.
Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the site of the rocket attack to pay respects to the victims' families and the Druze community. He told mourners the response will be harsh.
הילדים הללו הם הילדים שלנו. הם הילדים של כולנו. ומדינת ישראל לא תעבור ולא יכולה לעבור על כך לסדר היום. תגובתנו בוא תבוא, והיא תהיה קשה. ולאחינו ואחיותינו, העדה הדרוזית שילמה עד היום מחיר כבד מאוד במלחמה. אני מצדיע לחיילים הגיבורים שמסרו את נפשם למען כולנו.
Some in the community blamed the government for allowing the attack and shouted at Netanyahu, telling him to leave. Hezbollah has been moving around its precision-guided missiles as the region braced for a fierce Israeli response. Israeli officials have briefed the press saying that the response would be serious, but is not intended to lead to an all-out war. The unnamed official said Israel wants to hurt Hezbollah, but not drag the Middle East into regional war. Meanwhile, the cross-border exchanges are continuing. Fighter jets attacked Hezbollah infrastructure in Kfar Haman, from which launches were made to the area of Mount Dov. The IDF attacked and eliminated a terror cell operating in the Mis al-Jabal area. Earlier, a SAR missile ship intercepted an unmanned aircraft that made its way from Lebanese territory into Israel's economic waters.
Hezbollah and Lebanon are still bracing for an Israeli retaliation after murdering 12 children in Majd al-Shams. Jerusalem is said to be weighing its options carefully as the United States and other countries are applying immense pressure on Israel to refrain from a major strike. With tensions running high and speculations running wild, what is Israel waiting for? Joining us now to discuss all this and more is Senior Vice President of Research at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Jonathan Schanzer. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So Israel is once again slow playing a retaliation. I mean, it could take out Hezbollah weapons depots or other major targets, but it's holding off. What is it waiting for?
Well, first of all, I think we're seeing significant pressure from the United States and perhaps from other Western powers. The U.S. is fearful of a significant escalation in the Middle East. I think we already see a war. It already is underway between Israel and Hezbollah. But I think the U.S. understands it full well. They're not wrong to note that this could be a significant escalation. It could drag the entire region into war. And so the U.S. is warning against that, trying to caution the Israelis to move deliberately, perhaps slowly, perhaps surgically, in order to prevent a wider conflagration. The other thing that we're hearing is that there is an effort to get diplomats and Westerners out of Lebanon. The Israelis have warned all major airlines not to service the Beirut airport through the end of the week. So the Israelis have given themselves ample time to prepare for this attack, and they're doing so in the time and place of their choosing.
You know, it seems that every time Israel is attacked, it's told by the United States or other countries to refrain, to hold back. As we saw, for example, with the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel conducted a very limited and very minor retaliation, more to send a message, after Iran launched over 200 missiles and drones at Israeli cities. I mean, how do you explain this? And is this the right course of action for Israel with regards to Lebanon?
Well, I mean, I think first we should just unpack the U.S. policy, and that has been to restrain its friends and allies and to embolden its adversaries and enemies. That has been the case from the beginning of this war. We continue to see an upside-down American policy where we're calling for Israeli restraint in the face of overwhelming violence from Iran-backed proxies or Iran itself. And that is not the way to deter the Islamic Republic. My assessment is that every time you see these messages coming out of Washington, that it has the reverse effect. In other words, if what we're trying to do here in D.C. is to prevent a wider war, every time we restrain the Israelis and give a green light to Iran or its proxies to fire on Israel, this only adds to the escalation. What's needed right now is a significant Israeli response backed by the United States, so that Iran and its proxies understand that there is a price to pay for what they've been doing around the region. So I think we've got a very dangerous situation right now where the U.S. appears to be trying to prevent a war, but actually may be stoking a wider one.
And if and when Israel chooses to retaliate, I mean, what will its objectives be? What would it hope to gain from this retaliation?
Well, I think there are a couple of things here that the Israelis have to be thinking about. The first is precision-guided munitions. We understand that there are about 1,500 of these special munitions in the possession of Hezbollah. These weapons would give Hezbollah the ability to attack very specific targets with great accuracy, and they are very dangerous to Israel. These are the sorts of things that could potentially target Israeli water or electrical systems. They could target the chemical plant in Haifa or the nuclear facility in Dimona or skyscrapers in Tel Aviv. In other words, Israel needs to get rid of these, and they need to get rid of them quickly. So, I think they have held off up until now. If they have information about these PGMs and can target them accurately, I suspect that will be part of the effort. There is also, I think, the question of decapitation. Are there significant leaders that Israel can take out with pinpoint intelligence that would enable the Israelis, after maybe just a handful of strikes, to be able to say, we've made our point and we don't need to escalate any further? I think those are the sorts of things that Israel's thinking about. But then we have to just remember that there are installations of weapons, rockets, drones scattered across Lebanon. And these are the weapons that have been used to fire at Israelis for the last 9 months. Israel may be thinking about a much wider set of targets to prevent these kinds of attacks from continuing so deep into this conflict already.
And, I want to turn to Gaza as well. It's been nearly 10 months of war now. The IDF also initially waited for quite some time, a few weeks before launching its offensive in Gaza. I mean, looking back now, do you think this was the right course of action to wait, to take its time, as we're seeing in Lebanon? And what can we learn from Gaza that Israel can now apply to Hezbollah?
Well, I think there are a couple of lessons. One is, and this is interesting, but, in the beginning, Israel didn't even want to attack Gaza. As furious as Israelis were and outraged as they were about the 10/7 attacks, the Israeli government was actually thinking about going north first. And it was the Biden administration that convinced the Israeli government to instead focus on Gaza. And then, months later, we began to hear from the Biden administration, from the international community, that whatever Israel was doing in Gaza was too much anyway. And they have advised, for moderation or for holding back. And I think Israel has found itself in an impossible position where it finds that it can't win in Gaza, under the sort of normal rules of engagement. The U.S. has been, forcing Israel to fight with one hand tied behind its back, whether because of Ramadan or because of fears about a humanitarian crisis. Whatever it is, Israel has found itself unable to do the work that it needs to do to finish the war. I think Israel needs to learn something here, that they need to stick with the battle plan that they have. They need to not pause. They need to push forward, get the win under their belt, get those objectives done, and then hopefully move on to the next, because there are, of course, other proxies of Iran that are lying in wait.
All right, well, Jonathan Schanzer, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thanks for having me.
And Israel and Hamas are each accusing the other of stalling on a hostage for ceasefire agreement by raising new demands. There are still 120 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza for nearly 300 days now. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the details.
The Prime Minister's office says that unlike Hamas, it has not added or changed any conditions to the proposals for a hostage for ceasefire agreement with Hamas. The announcement came after Hamas accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of adding new conditions and demands to a U.S.-backed Israeli truce proposal. The announcement came after CIA Director Burns held a high-level round of negotiations in Rome with Mossad Chief Barnea, Qatari Prime Minister Al-Thani, and Egyptian intelligence chief Abbas Kamal. Barnea had presented negotiators a list of clarifications to the May 31st proposal, which included a number of points Netanyahu had raised as his red lines. They reportedly include a continued IDF presence at the critical buffer zone at the Gaza-Egypt border, known as the Philadelphia Corridor, and the insistence that Palestinian terrorists must not be able to return to northern Gaza. Israel is reportedly also demanding a list of living hostages. Hamas is describing the Israeli red lines as Netanyahu once again returning to the strategy of procrastination, delay, and evasion from reaching an agreement by setting new conditions and demands. 116 Israelis remain in Hamas captivity since October 7th. The IDF believes that less than half of them remain alive.
And in a grave and unprecedented incident, 9 IDF soldiers are being held for suspected abuse of a Palestinian terrorist in this Deteiman detention facility. The incident has sparked protests by right-wing activists who stormed the IDF base over their detention. Meanwhile, the accusations against the soldiers have drawn widespread condemnations from political and military leaders. ILTV's Ariella Lachiani has more. Ariella, what can you tell us about this incident?
Yes, Adar. So last night, far-right activists broke into a military base where IDF soldiers were being held for allegedly abusing a Palestinian detainee. Activists and participators included far-right Knesset members. IDF Chief of Staff Halevi has condemned the attack and stated that this has just harmed the army and the war effort. And President Herzog, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant have also denounced the attack and called for calm.
A very disturbing incident indeed. And moving on, the UK under Keir Starmer is considering halting arms sales to Israel in the latest string of anti-Israel policies taken by the new Labour Party government. All the details in the following report. The UK under the new Labour Party may decide to cease exporting arms to Israel in the near future. This is the concern from Jerusalem. While multiple Hebrew-language media sites speculated the move could be confirmed as early as Tuesday, other news outlets reported that the British government confirmed it would not issue an update on the matter as of yet. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced his intentions to assess the legal situation regarding the use of British weapons in Gaza, and has advocated that the UK should suspend weapon sales to Israel if they were found to be used in breach of humanitarian law. Though he said that the UK would not suspend all UK arms exports, as it would allow for defensive weapons. This move would follow other steps taken by the new Labour government under Prime Minister Keir Starmer against Israel, including restoring funding to UNRWA, which was suspended by the previous government after the extent of the terror ties between UNRWA and Hamas were revealed. UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th massacre, and UNRWA schools were used by Hamas as bases to carry out terror attacks against Israel. Hamas facilities were also found directly underneath UNRWA's headquarters, which supplied the terrorists with electricity. The new Labour government has also withdrawn objections to the International Criminal Court's request for arrest warrants against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. The concern from Jerusalem now is that should the UK go forward with this move, other countries may soon follow suit. The UK, under Keir Starmer's Labour Party, has taken a number of steps against Israel, from reinstating funding for UNRWA to withdrawing its objections to the ICC's request for arrest warrants against Israeli officials, and now possibly ceasing weapons sales to Israel. Joining us to discuss this policy shift and its impact on UK-Israel relations is writer and political commentator Adam Schwarz. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So let's start with the potential suspension of arms sales. I mean, Jerusalem is reportedly very concerned over this move. How much of an effect will it have on Israel and on the war effort?
Well, I think it's worth noting just to begin that, of course, the UK government doesn't directly sell weapons to Israel, but of course it approves export licenses, which have been quite significant. Since 2015, it had about £500 million worth of exports. But as you've mentioned, Foreign Secretary David Lammy has ordered a review into the use of British weapons in Gaza by Israel, and particularly due to its kind of incompatibility with international law. So we'd expect the kind of outcome of that review and a decision really by the end of the summer. But in terms of the impact that it would have on Israel's war effort and its capabilities, that really does largely depend on the kind of halt that the UK would impose on weapons. So, for example, David Lammy did mention the fact that actually this would largely be related, if it happened, due to or would largely affect offensive weapons rather than defensive weapons. And I would say that if you look at the kind of weapons that are supplied to Israel from the UK, there's really nothing that's particularly kind of irreplaceable. And really, Israel, with time, could largely replace a lot of it through other sources, particularly from the US, I would say. I would say the primary impact of this would kind of be diplomatic. So, for example, I would say that the main impact would actually be that it would largely legitimize the conditioning of aid to Israel to try to influence Israeli policy in some way. So, of course, we could see other Western allies take the same approach, which wouldn't be a particularly kind of unusual approach in terms of conditioning aid on policy. But I would say that would be the primary concern of the Israeli government at this time.
Mm-hmm. And, the new Labour Party has also reinstated funding for UNRWA and withdrawn its objections to the ICC. It seems to have sort of come in and flipped British foreign policy with regards to Israel on its head in many regards. Is the Labour Party under Keir Starmer hostile to Israel, do you think?
I wouldn't describe it as being hostile. I mean, I think there have been some shifts. Of course, you mentioned the ICC decision and also the UNRWA decision as well, certainly compared to Conservative Party. But I would say even if you look at the Conservative Party and its history and record on Israel, in 2014, David Cameron's government drew up a list of weapons that would be being used by Israel at the time in Gaza and said that it wouldn't actually be supplying them if the conflict continued. So I don't think it's a major shift that we've seen. And I think really if you look at Keir Starmer's record, he wrestled the leadership of the Labour Party away from kind of Jeremy Corbyn, a far left figure who was kind of known for his anti-Israel policies. That was a core part of his persona. And if you look at really Keir Starmer's record, particularly since 7th of October, he has repeatedly reiterated Israel's right to self-defense. He has been very cautious in terms of his criticism of Israel. He has not used the kind of language in which many in his party have wanted him to. He's focused on issues of trying to get aid into Gaza rather than to do with issues of criticising Israel's military. And he's also, been very supportive of when the UK participated in attempts to try to, knock down the Iranian projectiles that were fired from Iran just a few months ago. But look, the reality is that the Labour Party are on the left wing of British politics, and so you are going to see more internal opposition to Israel from within the government. But really what I would say is you're going to see a kind of emergence of a foreign policy that is supportive of Israel, but actually not supportive of the Netanyahu government. But again, you also have the UK supporting other ways of supporting its kind of continued policy. For example, it's maintained under Keir Starmer its kind of strikes against the Houthis. So overall, I think, the UK government still sees itself as quite supportive, but it doesn't see its kind of support as completely unconditional, particularly on issues relating to, let's say, this two-state solution.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, we're almost out of time, but I just want to hear from you. How has this string of new measures affected Israel-UK relations, if at all?
I mean, the new British government has only been in place for about 3 weeks, so really, you know, we haven't had any indications from diplomatic sources on either sides of any kind of major upset in relations. We know Foreign Secretary David Lammy visited Israel, I think, last week and met Netanyahu, which of course is a very positive thing. But, you know, look, Starmer and David Lammy did meet with Israeli ambassador to the UK, Hutaveli, throughout their time in opposition. And so certainly relations are not kind of starting from scratch at this point. But I think we are going to see relations come under quite a bit of strain. But I think, you know, largely the kind of main issues of UK supporting Israel to do with its defence will largely remain intact. But I think where the UK government sees it can provide a kind of constructive role in terms of trying to encourage Israel to support a peace process, I think it won't be shy about doing that.
All right, Adam Schwarz, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Good to be with you.
In politics at the Paris Olympic Games, Israel has accused an Algerian judoka competitor with intentionally failing a weigh-in to avoid facing Israel. The Israeli team is also handling death threats. Olympic medalist and head of the Israeli Olympic Committee is speaking out in Paris. More on this from ILTV's Devo Klein.
Algeria's Redouane has been scheduled to compete in the under 73-kilogram category against Israel's Toar Boutboul on Monday, but was found to weigh above the 73-kilogram limit. Algeria's athletes have refused to compete with Israel in the past. In the 2021 Tokyo Games, Nourine refused a judo match against Boutboul. As a result, the International Judo Federation handed him a 10-year suspension. Israeli head of the IOC Yael Arad is a legend as the first Israeli to win an Olympic medal at the 1992 Olympics. A judoka herself, Arad felt the need to speak out and accuse the Algerian competitor with intentionally failing a weigh-in to avoid facing an Israeli competitor.
And I think this is a disgrace. I think that, you can play with the weigh in the category. I wasn't prepared, but everybody knows this is political issues. My heart goes to this athlete. I'm sure it's not his decision. I'm sure it's, the management. And I think these guys, the coach, the delegation, has to be punished because it's not about the athlete. He's a victim of the system.
Arad said that the team had been facing death threats, but security is strong and the athletes can focus on the games.
There are, in several occasions, threats, real threats, directly to the telephones of the athletes and their families that are going to die. Threats that you shouldn't come to Paris because we will kill you. Threats in the social media. Threats that they deliberately public and promote the numbers of member delegations and call for an action, to threaten them. But I must say that on the other side, we get here in Paris so much love from so many people.
Incredible what the Israeli athletes have to go through. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Partly cloudy skies are expected tonight around most of the country, with temperatures sitting at lows of around 23 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, sunny skies and hot weather is expected as temperatures should be reaching highs of 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.